This is The Strange Recital, a podcast about fiction which questions the nature of reality.
Everyone just wants to be loved a bit more than everyone else. See me, and not my brothers, my sisters, my bandmates. Love me and not my kid. Feel my sadness. Imagine a world where you could look at others' pleas for attention in your hand endlessly, and compete with that endlessly too. Big Bird races through numbers, forward to 10 and back down to 0. I turn away as the alphabet starts. The large, beveled motel room mirror over the bureau has misted over, just like in the bathroom. What is this? I want to go home to Woodstock. I want to see my boy. He still loves Muppets. Maybe he'd still laugh if I did my Cookie Monster. I drove with him strapped into the bucket seat beside me, 3 years old, back and forth across West L.A., looking to score from Mickey Twist. Liz thought we were off to a play date. I made up stories all afternoon for his and my benefit, frantic for a fix. Imagine if every time you talked your voice came out like Goofy's, I asked. Junior howled as I reached back into a cooler filled with imported beer. What if everything on your face turned rubbery and you looked in the mirror and saw Goofy, too? Just imagine. Yeah, like your head would turn around and everything, I remember him saying through his laughter. But was he really talking then? Is the fog encroaching? Memory a jumble, but better than anything jamming my throat. Albert gone, planes falling out of the sky, the Challenger down, AIDS, prenups, Cinderella finally fucked. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God, was what the president had said. His words stuck like a Ray Charles song in my gut. Not everything's a song, or at least one I would feel right singing. Someone knocks at the door. I'm standing in the middle of a misty room, naked as a scarecrow. I reach for a towel, wrap myself, and step forward. I open my darkness to the light. I make out a badly shaven old imp dude in a moth-eaten forest green sweater with a stand-back baseball cap on his head, all 5 feet of him standing in the glare. He's talking something fast at me about trouble and mountains, Woodstock, and my old ladies, and even my kid Junior. Man, give me a moment, I tell him. I feel like death warmed over. The old man quiets down in the doorway as I step back into the room to the bureau and rummage around. Keys, wallet, change, slips of paper, and a pack of matches from the gateway. Slipping on the pair of shades my hand finally finds, I turn back to the door and ask the dude to repeat what he'd been telling me. Slower this time, please. Your kid. I've been told to tell you he needs you. Now, he's hurting, but bad, up north there, where he's been living with his mom the way you left them. There was some call this morning. Something's happened, my friend. You're needed for who you've been, for who you still could be. Woodstock, man, she's calling you. He paused and caught his breath. That Woodstock? It's the real place? The man's mouth didn't seem to move as he talked, even though his words came clear and fast. He seemed to have shrunk within his clothes, old stained chinos 3 sizes too big. His gray eyes, one cataract clouded, stared me down, with this weird smile in them, like he knows something I don't. Wait, I reply. What you saying, man? You seen my lady, Dawn? I was just in the shower. She just went for coffee. And what's all this about Junior and Liz? Did I miss something? What are you doing down here, is what I should ask, says the little man. Your lady friend, she drove out in a red rental car a half-hour ago, back before lunch. It's time to up and climb the mountain, she said. But your mission's bigger than that, sir. And your time, by the look of things, has been wasted already. What can I say? Still foggy as the mirrors inside my lonely room, still climbing out of the previous night's blackout, I'm having trouble getting a handle on the strange little dude's words. The man in the stand-back cap had an impish smile. Without asking, he climbed in the car as Klokko pulled his blanket tighter. Thought you'd be able to give me a ride up to the cabin, the little guy said. I'm just shy of a century, you see, and the legs don't work like they used to. We'll be making a right turn here once she turns green. Klokko looked straight ahead, rattled by the man's sudden appearance. He'd been on such a high, and now it was starting to seep out of him. Why, he thought, did he let himself get into these situations? He turned as the man had requested when the light shifted green. I'm trying to get to Woodstock, he haltingly said. Need some things. Good place, Woodstock, if also a bit odd. Lots of folk come up walking from there. I mean, most of them bring the car and stuff, park it, and then walk. But some actually walk, the old guy started chattering, making no mention of the driver's strange apparel, or lack of any besides the blanket skirted around his lap. It's that close? Klokko asked without self-consciousness for once. The guy hadn't mentioned his nakedness. Furthermore, he hadn't figured himself so close to his destination already. Had he always been this close? Perfect timing, given the fuel light had come on again. Should he ask the old guy for money? He'd spent what the kids gave him on tolls and forgot to get his change the last time he paid. Used to be I could walk everywhere. Didn't like the car and how fast it made you go, the old guy continued. One time I came across a boy along here. He was playing with this water snake, see, who had its teeth in his arm. Water snake was hanging straight down off that boy's arm, blood dripping and everything. I told him I didn't think that was wise, carrying a snake like that, so I told him to take that snake off his arm, I did. I don't like snakes, Klokko said. My mother didn't like them either. My ma always told me they were pure evil, she did. Told me she burned out an entire forest when she was heavy with me. She'd seen one climb up out the hole in our outhouse, the old guy said. One time I saw this snake in an old chestnut tree. Thing poked his head out at me and flashed that tongue of his. Put his head back in that hole as fast as he'd poked it out. Right at my eye level, that was. Snake just kept poking in and poking out the whole time I stood there. Guess that's when I decided I might as well not be afraid of no snake, even if I didn't like them. The Delta 88 rolled past the turnoff that would have led Klokko home. You make your next left, a right, next two lefts. Even with that warning light, you should have plenty to get you where you're going, the old guy said. You've driven these roads a lot, but never past where you've always gone, I take it. Klokko smiled. It hurt, but only a little, he realized, keeping with the odd feeling. He liked these changes coming over him. They seemed easy now, especially given all those years of fear. A car rolled silently into the driveway 30 feet from Klokko, stopped his first attempt at full-throated singing since he was a kid. It was not just any car, but his old green Oldsmobile. A naked man was driving, bearded, graying, angry-eyed. Same dude who had been at Sid Ford's talking to his lady, a man like himself. Klokko darted up the lawn, not about to try for a getaway in the car he had stolen from this guy staring him down. He started running into the forest, then stopped, recalling a bicycle back by the basement doors. He'd take that. He ran back towards the house and passed within 10 feet of the naked man, covered in his baby blanket with the sailboats hollering at the top of his lungs as he reached and then started his ride on a girl's rally. He took off up the driveway, wobbling because it had been a couple of decades he had been off two-wheeled transportation of any kind. He headed for the road to Woodstock he had just come down from. Even though he knew his naked pursuer would be coming out of the big pink driveway soon in the black rent-a-car, all the fear started seeping out of Klokko. This guy wasn't after him, but somehow after the same mysterious thing he was after. He glanced over his shoulder and saw him not looking his way at all. He was staring at Big Pink, just as he had. He had heard the man call out to him, say there was no need to run. Klokko listened intently to the ensuing silence punctuated by his pedaling, his breath. He checked out the woods rising on either side of the road he was on. He could have been a good father, given the opportunities. Change could occur, he thought. Things can still happen. I can run. I can move on my own terms, of my own accord. Maybe even make a family, finally. Get a job. Acceptance is a plot twist, in action, as strong as any heroic dive into the unknown, Klokko figured. It's just quieter, harder to tell tales of. He hit an incline and stood on the pedals to get more speed. Looking over his shoulder, Klokko again looked for the car he had just been driving. He noted the play of March light against the rock faces above him, saw that first tinge of pink and purple in the tree branches that augured the coming of spring. Should he stop for his pursuer? His new boots, oddly comfortable, seemed to pump the bike's pedals of their own accord. He seemed to already be in contact with this man behind him, as if in a dream. Something big was pulling the two of them down towards the valley, towards that mythical rock and roll town he had long heard about, but never visited. "That's Overlook," he said, aloud, motioning his head to the mountain which dominated to his right. He careened into a nearby driveway and cut across a lawn to a second driveway, then a third, as he spotted the black car speed by through the woods, the naked man's head turning back and forth, looking. The man pulled in across the way, did a three-point turn, and headed back towards Big Pink. Klokko took the opportunity and shot back out onto the main road and took off. The two sat looking into each other. "We both fucked up," Richard Manuel finally added. "Thought we had all the time in the world, all the love to give and take. Didn't notice what there was around us, or that it all catches up with you." Klokko grunted, looking down to the floor. "Fathers, sons, singers, songs, it matters shit," Manuel said, as if suddenly realizing it useless to be angry when dead. "I'm a fucking spider," Klokko said, low and almost inaudible. "A spider just like fucking God's an asshole spider." "A beautiful fucking spider, you mean? Weaving perfect webs, intricate designs." "Biting," replied Klokko. "Only when cornered," Richard answered. "You do sound like hell." "Always have," said Klokko. "You mind if I sit next to my cat on the bench with you?" "Sure, dude. It's both of ours, cat." Klokko rose and sat down on the piano bench. "I saw them slugs, too. I know you did. Squished a whole mess of them when you peeled out after seeing me." The wood fire blazed. The men sipped their wine, identical in pajamas, slippers, bathrobes. "Why is it those like us always need more love?" Richard said. He shook his head and played a descending piano measure.
That was Richard and Klokko, written and read by Paul Smart. This story is comprised of 4 excerpts from the novel Overlook by Paul Smart, Recital Publishing, 2023.
Hi, Paul. Welcome back to The Strange Recital.
Hey, Brent. Hey, Tom. It's great that we're finally getting around to this. I can't believe we missed it when I was back in Woodstock in June.
Well, this is our second episode featuring your novel, Overlook. And as you said earlier this summer, you took a month-long trip from your home in Mexico to drive around the Hudson Valley and beyond, doing all kinds of presentations and readings. So tell us a little about that.
It was amazing coming back to the States from Mexico. It had been over 2 years since I'd returned, and I'd forgotten just how green it was, almost oppressively green, which, as you know, brought on a case of bad allergies, which then led to the laryngitis, which kept us from recording earlier this summer.
Yeah.
I was doing a number of readings. I was also screening my new film, Don Barry, both in New York and in Woodstock. And some of the readings went really well, some not so well. That all said, it was excellent just catching up with people, catching up with old friends, and driving through these landscapes that I know internally and that play a large role in this book, Overlook.
What we just heard was a series of excerpts from the beginning, the middle, and the end of the novel. Give us a short summary of the book and tell us why you chose these excerpts.
It's a road journey. It's sort of a picaresque with two different characters. And that's all I'm going to say about the overall plot. It starts in Florida with one character needing to get home and drawn by Overlook, the mountain that looms over Woodstock, and of which everybody seems to have an opinion and a myth about its legacy. So in choosing the excerpts from this book, I wanted to get a sense of its the lyrical aspects that I was bringing in, which are drawn from years and years of driving around through the Catskills and the East Coast, and kind of the magic that occurs with one's way of thinking while driving, and the way we listen to music and it affects us as driving. And then I also wanted to highlight a couple of the specific locations that come into play, including Big Pink, which we all know about for its role in both the history of the band and Mr. Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
And I also wanted just to get a sense of the narrative arc and the way it goes through these subtle changes as you're moving forward through it.
In the Hudson Valley One online newspaper, locally popular musician and writer John Burdick said about Overlook that it's both a high-minded hero's journey myth of underworld passage, return and redemption, as well as a teeming beatnik litany of all that is rent, meaning torn and broken. What was your reaction to that?
Well, Burdick's talk of high-minded hero's journey and the beatnik stuff, I actually sent an excerpt from his review out to some friends of mine from college, and they said without even reading the full review or knowing what it was a review of, they knew it was me just from that emphasis on a hero's journey, underworld passage, return, redemption, and beatnik. So it felt kind of perfect, as does his noticing my fascination in Overlook with all that has been rent. There's something beautiful about upstate New York's wrecked landscape. It's a land of modern ruins.
Yeah.
And I noticed this even more during this past trip going through old towns where, the barns I remembered would have fallen down, or all the stores would be closed up. And this was not just in the Catskills and Hudson Valley. All throughout my journeys, I kept finding this rent landscape. But anyway, going back to it, the whole beatnik litany is something that's long attracted me. Not just the litany of all that is rent, but also the idea that in all that we see, there is both beauty and ugliness.
I have a lot of respect for the superpowers of imagination and empathy, which in combination allow writers to create a facsimile of a human consciousness that never existed before. Now, in this case, you had the extra challenge of inhabiting the imagined mind of a real person, Richard Manuel, who is fairly well documented on film, in performance, if not in private. Say a little about your process of getting into his mind.
It was a long process. Back in '94, before the second Woodstock Festival, I did a book called Rockin' Woodstock and did a lot of interviews with people around town who were either players in the rock and roll history of the town or could comment on it, who were bystanders. Add to that the fact that there was a period of time there where I was working with Richard Manuel's widow, Jane. Well, not exactly widow, they had split up beforehand, but working with her on what was going to be a memoir. It never worked out, but I retained memories from that, retained memories of Manuel's history from, and stories about him from a lot of other people, and then added to that a lot of time spent reading every account I could of his life, his being, and then just listened very, very closely to everything he recorded.
And then, of course, you completely invented the weird Klokko character. Or did you? Was he based on a real person?
Klokko is a character that there are two photographer friends of mine that live up in Schoharie County, Sue Daly and Steve Gross, dear, dear friends of many years. They've done a lot of photographing of vernacular architecture throughout the deep Catskills, things that are capturing them before they disappear. And we would get together, we would do lots of long drives around the deeper Catskills and spend a lot of evenings sitting around wood fires in fireplaces in the winter and wood fires out in the yard during the summer. And we would talk about the hobbits that we would see, these men and women who just kind of lived these quiet lives. And out of these talks, we came up with, or they came up with, and then I adapted this character of Klokko, which included a lot of the deepest thoughts I had living alone in an 18-room farmhouse up in Westkill, surrounded by a cemetery. And, you sit there night after night listening to the wind blow over you, like breath over a wide-lip bottle. And you start to imagine, what your life would be if you had not come to this place from somewhere else, but were born of it. And out of all of that came Klokko.
Many years ago, I was at a reading in High Falls where, besides you, other readers were Luke Sant, Mary Gateskill, Kim Wozencraft, Sparrow, all pretty well-known names. And the reading that stuck out the most for me was yours, when you read the scene from Overlook, in which Klokko is dancing naked in the rain in his tiny family graveyard deep in the Catskills. That was such a memorable scene that it stuck with me all these years and may have eventually led to our publishing the novel. I assume you remember that event. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that was a wonderful evening. That the piece that I read two pieces. I read the one you remember, and then I also read this section from a book I was working on at that time about the wild side of Maui. But the evening you're talking about rolling around naked in the family graveyard, that comes out of a direct moment from my own life where it was, my house was surrounded by lawns just filled with wild thyme. And especially when it rained, it would just, the whole smell of those lawns was just fabulous. And it was a summer night. It started to rain. And next thing I knew, I was rolling naked in the wild thyme, and then jumped from that nakedness in the wild thyme naked into my large car at the time, which was not a Delta 88. It was a suicide door Lincoln Continental, and went riding up through the back roads of Greene County. Of course, it being the back roads of Greene County, you don't run into anybody, but it still felt like one of the great adventures of my life.
Yeah.
And gradually I started to share this experience with people, and it always kind of blew them away. But I realized there was something more than just craziness in it. There was something very elemental and primal. And so I just pulled from that and brought it into the book. And then it sort of becomes a theme, since both characters end up driving naked for long periods of the narrative.
Well, I've been wondering about that little old man. He appears in the beginning at the Florida motel and then again later in the Catskills. He seems to have something of a mystical nature. Tell us about him.
Well, the old guy, Cato, I pulled the name Cato, not quite sure where I was pulling it from. It turns out, it does come out of classic literature. And what I was looking for was a Virgil-like character, almost a mystical being that shows up to help show the direction its lost characters need to find to finish their journey. The actual character of Cato was pulled from the act of writing the book, which I did in this small cabin right on the edge of Platte Clove. It's owned by the Catskill Center for Conservation and Development. And back then they used to offer it out for artist retreats. And I was there for a week. That's when I wrote the book. It came out in this huge, as several people have said, it is like a fever dream. I went walking along the road, and that's when I ran into this guy, real name Jim, and that's all I remember, who was about 97, dressed just as Cato is in the book, and had a talk with him, and then went back and had another talk the next day. And so I just kind of transformed him into this character within the book.
I think it's interesting the way you chose to stick to certain facts about Richard Manuel, such as his suicide in a Florida motel, but you fictionalize other things. Obviously, his afterlife has to be fiction, but you also chose to give him one son when he actually had two children, and you changed the place where his memorial was held in Woodstock. Some names were changed and others were not. So say a little bit about your thoughts on the boundaries between fiction and history.
When you decide to take on rock and roll or anything pop culture to write a history of it, you kind of lose a sense of what is truly factual and what is just drug-addled memory that floats to the top. So there's a lot of leeway there, just as there's a lot of leeway in fiction and especially biography. It's been a standard in biography for decades, if not centuries now, of fictionalizing to bring it alive, to make it have more soul.
Yeah.
So I would pull pieces, and then in the process of writing, instead of having two children, making it just one child, changing the names. And the same with the women in Manuel's life, changing the names so nobody would feel hurt, especially if they're alive.
Mm-hmm.
I had tried changing the names of the members of the band. I had a different name for Bob Dylan.
Oh, really?
That just didn't make sense, partly because they're public figures and it's safe working with that. Some other things like having the memorial service at Overlook Methodist Church didn't have the impact of doing it out at the Bearsville Theater, where I had attended quite a few memorial services, and just the way the windows work in that place made it much more interesting to write about. So all throughout the thing, it's a mixture of facts, things from my own experience, and the things that I wanted to play with in the writing. You shape things to make them more compelling for a reader. The manual I was playing with was something that I heard in his music from the first time I listened to him.
Speaking of boundaries, John Burdick also wrote, "For most of this novel, the corporeal and the ethereal are indistinguishable, caught in a liminal game of transition. So there's the boundary between the physical and non-physical realities. And then there's the boundary between Richard and Klokko, whose real name is also Richard. These doppelgangers are, mysteriously, not two persons but one. What are your thoughts on that?"
The whole idea of the doppelganger is something that has always interested me. The fact that it becomes part of your being when you see one person who is similar to another, or you've seen that person in the context of this other person, and so they meld into what is something similar to a doppelganger. More importantly is when you go through life, especially as you age, you start to see reflections of things you've seen in the past, whether wished for or just bubbling up from one's subconscious. You see them all the time, or I do, even here in Mexico. And kind of an interesting take on this is the fact that the first year I was away from Woodstock, I kept getting reports from people asking if I was still in Woodstock because people were seeing somebody that looked like me. Of course, this past June when I was there, I went searching around to see if I could find that doppelganger. But in doing so, people then thought that I was a doppelganger of myself because they weren't expecting to see me.
It could get complicated.
This novel's right up our alley because it steps outside of what is conventionally considered reality, but it does so in a way that's not genre. It's not science fiction or fantasy or horror. I'm quite certain you gave no thought to those marketing pigeonholes as you were writing, and I'd like to hear you say something about why that's the way you work.
You know, the whole idea of marketing pigeonholes, it just is something I don't play with at this point. Having retired from writing for money, which I did for years through all the different journalism jobs I had up and down the Hudson Valley, now I can just focus on what's in my head and bringing it to life and giving it a shine that I feel proud of.
Yes.
So, you know, those pigeonholes don't make sense to me, although they hound me at all times. The film that I've made is a mixture of nonfiction and fiction. It's sort of a biographical film. It's experimental. And film festivals are they're saying they like it. They don't know how to program it. So it does create problems working in the way that I do, but I enjoy those problems. I can afford those problems, and I'm just going to dive deeper into them as I move forward.
Good.
And I'm very proud to be working with Recital, which acknowledges that same turf, no matter how challenging it can be.
Yeah.
I think it's realistic to call this book a road novel, even though that's not an actual genre. But a great deal of the action takes place in cars on roads. Tell us why you did that.
Well, the whole idea of having action take place in cars, I always lived farther afield, up in Greene County, in rural settings. And so my working life took place in the car as much as anything. It just became natural to do all my thinking, all my writing. And I do have a bad habit of keeping a scroll of paper next to me and scribbling things on it. I tried talking into a tape recording. I don't like it as much as trying to read some scribble afterwards, which kind of turns out to be self-editing. But all the friends I had deeper in the Catskills, we would get together and go on road trips like weekly or every other day. And it's something that I've continued living down here in Mexico. We have a dog. There's nothing like riding with a dog in the car. Of course, in Overlook, there's a cat, which I've tried once or twice, and it's just been horrible driving with a cat. You know, I found that with my son, who just is 18 at this point, but if we need to talk about something, it's much easier to do so on a long car trip where he gets bored with his phone. We drive out of range of any decent Wi-Fi, and suddenly we're forced to really talk to each other and share a landscape that we're passing through. That's why, most of my works are concentrated or have been concentrated in that area.
You've already told us a bit about your other projects, but are you currently working on any more fiction?
I've got another film that I'm working on that's kind of plays around with nonfiction, where it's going to be following me through Mexico as I stumble through my Spanish. We're in the process of turning that into something that's about language and about how understanding goes beyond language. Also finishing up a film about our friend Sparrow, in which we shot about 2 hours of him just talking. That one becomes about the art of conversation. As for straight fiction, I'm currently working on a project. It's another kind of dual narrative involving the painter Winslow Homer and some facts that I know about him, and then a lot of conjecture looking into his paintings and creating him into a character. I would have to call this Winslow Homer book the straight fiction. I'm in the process of figuring it out. I'm likely going to self-publish it so that I can do something with the printing. I have a great printer I work with down here, but having a book that you read from one direction and then you read from another direction, and so the two reflect each other. And it's also going to be a project involving a visual element, which I really love playing with in my work these days, partly because I have such a great book designer down here that I've done several projects with at this point.
Our listeners can find more information about Overlook at recitalpublishing.com. It's available at all the usual places. And for those who've already read it, we ask that you please post a review on Amazon or Goodreads. These are very helpful.
Well, our time's up. Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks a lot, guys. It was great being with you all, and the next time you guys are going to have to come down here and we'll record in Guanajuato, Mexico. So thanks a lot.
I wonder if our podcast is also caught in a liminal game of transition.
What do you mean?
I don't really know. This is The Strange Recital on the web at thestrangerecital.com. The music on this episode was A Drone by Balance Engineer and Humbug by Crowander. This is episode 24091.